We have to all walk together. We have to try to work together. We have to listen to one another.
New leadership at the top of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and intense discussions about the Church's path forward in America. A full report from the Bishops' annual Fall Assembly.
You can't do it by yourself. You have to do it with God. If you do, you will be strong. You will be able to do it.
Care for the caregiver. Support and guidance for those who give selflessly of themselves to help others.
The Lord always fills you up. The deeper you go and the more your gift. And I would actually say our ultimate goal in giving is to give our entire selves.
Are you giving 10%? A look at the issue of tithing, why it's important, who's more likely to give, and how many actually do it. And joy rings out across the cradle of Christianity. The city, once ruled by the Islamic State, celebrates the first ringing of Catholic church bells since overcoming insurgent rule. EWTN News In Depth starts now.
I really do hope to build on the tremendous legacy that Archbishop Gomez has left us as someone who listened, who encouraged dialogue, and who brought us to the point we are now.
Defining a path for the future. We talked to the new president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. It was a consequential week of talks for the bishops who lead America's Catholic Church. From abortion in a post-Roe world, to the fallout from the midterm elections, to discussion about Eucharistic revival. Perhaps the biggest news was both the farewell of the outgoing president and the welcome of a new one to lead the conference the next 3 years. Today on EWTN News In Depth, we hear from both of them. We begin with reporter Mark Irons.
The man now charged with leading U.S. Catholic bishops comes from unique territory where spiritual warfare takes on new meaning. Archbishop Timothy Broglio leads the Archdiocese for the Military Services USA. He's the shepherd to U.S. Catholic service members throughout the world, and his chaplains go wherever they may be stationed, including in Poland, a country that borders the war in Ukraine.
We have 11,000 troops in Poland as I speak. And that is a tremendous concern if there would be any broadening.
As somebody who oversees military chaplains and military services, what is your perspective on faith during wartime?
Certainly soldiers and military people who are engaged in war begin to ask fundamental questions because they realize that this life that they've known could end very quickly.
Taking on his new role as president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, Archbishop Broglio told us in the U.S. the great threats are secularism and materialism. Both oppose the message of the Catholic Church, which teaches salvation through Jesus Christ and ultimate fulfillment after death.
I think most people, and it's probably a little bit of a generalization, but most people are looking for here and now and their happiness in this world, whereas we announce happiness in a world to come.
The Archbishop was elected this week to begin a 3-year term as president for the Bishops' Conference, 1 week after Americans took to the polls to vote nationally in the political midterm elections.
How should Catholics react to these outcomes that we've seen in the midterms?
We obviously hope for people who will at least be open, politicians who will at least be open to the message of the Church. And unfortunately, we're basically in a two-party system, and no one party captures everything that the Church teaches. And so this makes it difficult, and it also makes it a case-by-case scenario.
Just like his predecessor, Archbishop Jose Gomez, the new president of the Bishops' Conference, said he'd be open to meeting President Joe Biden, given the chance to speak in person.
One thing that I would like to emphasize would be certainly the dignity of the human person from the moment of conception to natural death. I would also like to emphasize the plight of the poor and the immigrants. I think that we have enough to offer that we can open our doors a little bit wider.
Speaking to reporters this week, Archbishop Broglio also reflected on lessons learned from his experience working as a personal secretary in the 90s to Cardinal Angelo Sodano. The now-deceased cardinal faced allegations of covering up clergy sex abuse.
I had actually left the office by the time the great accusations came out. Hindsight is always 20/20, and so many things that we've learned now perhaps certainly weren't known then.
This year's meeting of bishops was significant. 20 years ago, they created the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People, also known as the Dallas Charter. It establishes safeguards and enforces a zero-tolerance policy for clergy sexual abuse, meaning a priest is permanently removed from ministry with one credible allegation of abuse.
We have to continue to be very, very firm in our application of the Dallas Charter, and then it's also important, though, to recognize what has been accomplished.
Current data analyzed by a third party and reported to the bishops annually shows the vast majority of abuse accusations are old. Many of them happened decades ago, before the creation of the 2002 Dallas Charter. Archbishop Broglio says the church has stood firm in its ongoing commitment to protect children, but acknowledges an unfortunate byproduct may have been created.
No one would deny that there has been almost a chasm put between priests and their bishops.
The Catholic Project at the Catholic University of America recently finished an extensive national survey of priests. It found that, quote, priests' trust in their bishops has declined significantly in the last 2 decades. Further reporting, 82% of priests strongly agree that they regularly fear being falsely accused of sexual abuse. Archbishop Broglio said the study impacted him.
Everyone is innocent until proven guilty.
Do you think the attitude within the church has been, when it comes to clergy sex abuse allegations, guilty until proven innocent?
I'm afraid that's very much a fair evaluation of the way it is seen. Certainly not the way I see it, but I think that in general that's and it's unfortunate.
Looking ahead, this week the bishops continued advancing 2 initiatives taking place in the life of the church. In the U.S. in particular, a revival focused on igniting greater love for Christ alive in the Eucharist.
So I think certainly in terms of the Eucharistic revival, there's been a tremendous impulse to try and present the teaching of the church on the Eucharist and to invite people to come into that experience.
And the Synod on Synodality, a global church undertaking led by Pope Francis focused on listening to all members of the church, especially the marginalized.
I think as bishops we're going to have to make an effort to continue to listen, and not that it be reduced to a gripe session, but that truly we listen to the Word of God and we see how that conflicts sometimes with reality in our lives.
Archbishop Broglio says as he leads in his new role, he will continue to look to the example of Pope Francis.
He's been a great proponent of evangelization and evangelization of the peripheries, and that's something that I've taken very much to heart in the Archdiocese for Military Services, because we cannot wait in our chapels for young military to show up. We have to go where they are.
Mark Irons, EWTN News in Depth.
This week, the bishops also discussed how to fight for the unborn in a post-Roe world and the reaction to failed pro-life measures on midterm state ballots. Montana Bishop Michael Warfel was shocked when voters in his state rejected a measure that would have required giving medical care to infants born alive after an attempted abortion.
We thought it was a no-brainer. Very common sense to protect the life of children. Montana tends to be a state that's very supportive of protection of life. I think it's because of the way that was misrepresented by a group of physicians and others, like Planned Parenthood, is really colored how people view the referendum.
Archbishop William Lori, elected vice president of the Bishops' Conference this week, said building a culture of life requires educating, evangelizing, but also setting an example.
Our teaching is credible when we as a church jump in feet first and surround pregnant women facing difficult pregnancies with love, services, finding out what they need, knowing them.
The first Latino to serve as president of the USCCB, Archbishop Montse Gomez, made immigration a top issue during his 3 years of leadership. An immigrant himself, he's the first Mexican-born Archbishop of Los Angeles, the largest diocese in the United States, 2/3 of which is Latino. He has been an outspoken defender of immigrants and refugees and has also addressed racism head-on. He joins me now on the record to talk about the legacy of his time as president and his hopes for the future. Thank you so much for being with us, Archbishop Gomez. In hindsight, how significant was it that you're the first Latino president of the USCCB?
Well, I was honored to be elected president of the Conference of Bishops. So it was a blessing for me, and I hope that it was. I'm sure that it was very helpful for all the bishops of the United States to see and understand the presence of the Latinos in our country and in our church. I think. We work together. We have a good number of Latino bishops in the United States, and we're always trying to make clear that the presence of the Latino community in our church and in the country is very special. And I think the bishops understand that. I think the fact that they were nice to elect me as president shows that they really appreciate the presence of the Latino community in our church.
And that they understood it. Was your personal story as an immigrant a reason for your pastoral concern for migrants?
Well, it is. I mean, the fact that I can identify easily with everybody coming from especially from Latin America, but obviously that's something that is part of the history of the United States. I mean, historically we are a country of immigrants. So I think obviously it's obvious that even most of the bishops have relatives or people or relationships that call them to really understand the importance of immigration to our country. But I mean, the fact that they elected me as president 3 years ago, it's just a manifestation of how important it is for the bishops of the United States and for all of us in our country to find a way to have a serious and complete immigration reform.
Absolutely. And you were elected in 2019, I like to say, just in time for the pandemic. How did that affect your plans and your leadership role?
Well, it was something that nobody was expecting. But it's true. I mean, I was elected in November. I think the pandemic started the following year, especially in February and March. So we had to kind of adapt to that reality. But I think, in a sense, I was saying the other day that it was special. I mean, in the sense, it was a very challenging time for all of us in our country and in the world, for that matter. But that situation helped us to feel the need to be more united, especially in person. It was beautiful to pray together with Pope Francis in that beautiful prayer that he had. I think was in during the weekend of that year, and then Holy Week of that year. Excuse me. I just came back from Baltimore, so I don't know where I am. So. And then the consecration of the country to the Blessed Mother that we were able to do, so that helped us to understand the importance of being together and especially to rely on the presence of God in our lives. So the pandemic was very challenging, but I think we can say that something good that came from that was really the need to be together in person and work together for the bishops of the United States.
That's right. Coming together, finding unity through these challenges. In your first interview as president, you said something that stayed with me, that bishops are not bishops are not politicians. They're pastors. Is this a recommendation that you have for your brother bishops as they continue their work?
Oh, absolutely. I think all of us were ordained priests and then we ordained bishops. And I think it's clear to all of us that our call and our mission is to be pastors, to really be present to the people and help everybody to understand the beauty of the love of God for us and how special we are in the sense that God loves each one of us because we are all children of God, sons and daughters of God. So I think that's our mission, to bring that reality to the people of our time. Obviously, there are issues that are important in the social doctrine of the church that we want to share with everybody else, but as pastors. So I think that's something that is, I still think is really the centerpiece of our mission as pastors, as bishops in the United States.
And something that you'll have the opportunity to do as well now that you're back home more and you'll be able to spend more time with your diocese. In 2 years, we will be celebrating something remarkable, the National Eucharistic Congress, which you encouraged. What is your hope for this initiative?
Well, I think for myself and for all the bishops of the United States, it's a time to all of us in our country to reflect on the centrality of the Eucharist in our lives. That really brings us the presence of Jesus in the world, and especially in our families and in our personal life. So I think it's a great opportunity that we have to bring that beautiful truth to everyone in the United States, especially to all Catholics. I think the process is going to be really exciting. In the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, we already have our Eucharistic Congress for the Archdiocese, and we had more than 3,000 people coming for that beautiful celebration. We had presentation in English and presentation in Spanish, and then we had a procession with the Blessed Sacrament. And now we are starting the regional, because in the Archdiocese you have 5 regions. So in each one of the regions is going to be a Eucharistic Congress, obviously with the celebration of Mass and the and time for Eucharistic adoration. So, and then in the parishes, and finally, as you said, the National Congress. So Eucharistic Congress. So I think it's a great opportunity, and we started also with that beautiful document that we published on the Eucharist, and now it's in English and in Spanish. So I think it's useful for everybody to reflect on that, and then from there we can renew our apostolic mission to really go out and help people to see the importance of the centrality of the Eucharist and the presence of God in our lives.
Well, I hope that you'll be able to focus on that in your local archdiocese, but also to continue to be a light for everyone else who is looking to you for leadership, especially the Latino community. Thank you so much, Archbishop.
You're welcome. Thank you.
There was another consequential meeting of bishops this week, this one between German bishops and Pope Francis at the Vatican. Colin Flynn reports.
This week, 67 members of the German Bishops' Conference traveled here to Rome for a meeting with Pope Francis. This is what's known as an ad limina visit, and is something that the bishops try and do every couple of years. And among other things, it's a chance for the bishops to present reports to the Vatican on how their dioceses are doing back home. But more importantly, it's a chance for them to have an audience with the Pope and discuss certain issues with him. This meeting took place at the Vatican last night, and all the German bishops were in attendance. They met with the Pope for almost 2 hours. Now, we don't know the exact contents of what was discussed in that meeting, as it was private, behind closed doors. But what we do know is that this meeting has been eagerly anticipated and is being watched closely by many Catholics throughout the world, because of the direction that many of the German bishops seem to want to bring the Church in. They have called for changes in church tradition around issues such as sexuality, ordination of women, and even questioned the sacrament of priesthood itself. Now, some of the changes being suggested by many of the bishops are seen as so radical that many are concerned it could lead to a split in the universal church. These are concerns that even Pope Francis referenced on his flight back from Bahrain recently, when he said he didn't need another Protestant church. So all eyes were on this meeting, and if the German bishops would discuss these topics with the Pope face to face. Well, after the meeting yesterday, as per usual, the Vatican made no official comment, but the Bishops' Conference did release a statement, and they said that in their meeting with Pope Francis, they talked about the role of lay people in the Church and the challenge of spreading the faith in an increasingly secular world. They said that the synodal way was also discussed, but didn't go into any more details. This week, EWTN interviewed one of the German bishops, Bishop Wolfgang Ippolt, who heads up a diocese in the east of Germany. And in the interview, he acknowledged that the Pope's concerns were well-founded and said that the German Church could be expecting too much change to come from the synodal way. Instead, he suggested that the Church in Germany must seek a, quote, pastoral conversion, as the Pope has called for on numerous occasions. Well, tomorrow the German Bishops' Conference will hold a press conference in which we expect more details to emerge from that meeting. In Rome, Colm Flynn for EWTN News In Depth.
There's much more ahead today on EWTN News In Depth. First, celebrating the unique relationship between caregivers and those they take care of. We'll be right back.
I think my best memories in this time of, you caring for her and bringing her so close to our family has been just experiencing the beauty of her.
Reflecting on the last year of her grandmother's life, we explore the critical and important role of the caregiver.
The poorly named Respect for Marriage Act shows disrespect for the truth about marriage because it redefines what marriage is.
A controversial bill that would enshrine marriage rights for same-sex couples moves forward in the Senate. The impact it could have on religious liberty. And supporting the church with your donations, we'll talk to those who believe in the importance of giving 10%. An explanation of tithing coming up.
Many people think that when you get a very serious, possibly terminal diagnosis, that the good times are over, and that's not true.
The highs and lows, the ups and downs, the sadness and joy of taking care of someone with a serious illness or frailty. November is National Family Caregivers Month, and here at EWTN News In Depth, we would like to recognize the many people who give so much of themselves. That selfless work can bring with it many rewards, as Roselle Regis reports.
This journey of caregiving will definitely bring you closer to God.
Caregiving, a labor of love. Although rewarding, it comes with challenges.
My life turned upside down. I was thrown into this unexpected world of caregiving.
Maria Gaviria already had a busy life, a full-time job and caring for her 2 children, when her life changed in 2018.
I kept thinking, my mom there was something about my mom that was off when I saw her, and it was like, you need to go. And she was laying in bed. She was very depressed from cancer, from, almost hospice care, palliative care.
Maria stepped in as her mother's full-time caregiver and welcomed her mother, Lucia, into her family home in Florida. Throughout Maria's caregiving journey, she had people to turn to for help. Her spiritual director, family members, fellow church parishioners, and healthcare professionals. However, she realized not everyone had the same support she did. That's when she and her daughter Natasha, a clinical therapist, started Catholic Daughter.
Caring for a parent brings on very unique challenges physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. It's unlike anything that most women have experienced. Catholic Daughter, we say it's an experience, it's a movement to equip women with the knowledge, the skills, and the wisdom to conquer the 4th commandment.
That 4th commandment, honor your father and your mother. The ministry provides resources for individuals and parishes and access to the Catholic caregiver community.
At this point, we've helped, it's over 1,000 now of women who are caring for their parent. And what we started to notice is that they were really taking on this identity of a Catholic daughter.
According to the University of Michigan's national poll on healthy aging, 54% of adults 50 and older provide some caregiving to other seniors. The survey also found nearly all non-professional caregivers are unpaid, and nearly half of all recipients are elderly parents. However, despite emotional or physical fatigue and difficulties balancing work and other responsibilities, 96% of caregivers say they get something positive out of the experience. Michelle Johnson, who served as caregiver for her husband Stu, shares the same sentiment. Michelle is our colleague at EWTN.
8 years, ups and downs, but oh my goodness, how much closer we got in fighting the battle together for his life.
Michelle described her husband as athletic, handsome, and smart, but it was his sense of humor that captured her attention.
He came over to me at this dance. I didn't know this person, and he said, he's going to hate this. Up there, he's up there listening. Hi, my name is Stu, short for stupid. I thought that thought was hilarious.
Yeah.
And I mean, I thought, this guy doesn't take himself too seriously.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He just was that way.
Even after Stu was diagnosed with 3 separate bouts of cancer and underwent a leg amputation, Michelle was surprised to see her husband in high spirits after his surgery.
There he was, entertaining, the nurses and the doctors and being his usual self, and everybody in the hospital loved him. That's who he was. And, so it would be, I got to see what real courage is. And it was him.
Stu's condition worsened over time, and after 8 years of his battle with cancer, he passed away peacefully with Michelle by his side, holding his hand. Michelle says her resolve as a caregiver was strengthened when she turned to Jesus. Wanting to help others, she has written a book, Walking the Way of the Cross for Caregivers, How to Cope Practically, Emotionally, and Spiritually when a loved one has a serious illness.
In your book, and I love this quote, you said, "I have learned more about love during my husband's long illness than I have learned in the entire 35 years we were married." Tell us about this love.
You really do. That's something that you would miss if you terminated the person's life too soon.
With all of that 8-year journey and looking back now, would you say that battle was worth it?
Oh, honey, it was more than worth it. There's a purpose for each one of us to go through suffering, and each of us has to learn what that is. You walk with Jesus, you learn that. And that is what I say in the book is going to make you better, not bitter.
Whether it's caring for a spouse like Michelle or caring for a parent like Maria, both agreed that the experience has brought them closer to their faith.
You will bloom because you will know that you're accompanied by him. And when you have faith, you have hope, he will send you everything that you need at the right time. Even though you're overwhelmed, you are exhausted, you will start realizing how he works. And
Rochelle Regis, EWTN News In Depth.
The Little Sisters of the Poor is a beautiful order of women religious that serve the elderly poor in more than 30 countries around the world. Many of the people they serve are in their final years. Joy Smiles, an activities assistant, and Regina Minacho, a registered nurse, both work with the Little Sisters of the Poor. They join us now to talk more about the caregiving field. Thank you both for joining us. Joyce, the Little Sisters of the Poor build a culture of life by nurturing the elderly and offering compassion for the suffering. In your 27 years working with them, can you tell us the impact family visits have had for those in your care?
Yes, I can. When the family visits come to visit their loved ones, they bring joy and they bring happiness there. They feel so loved. They're excited. My mom came from such and such a distance to come here. They bring their grandkids, family members that they haven't seen in a long time. It's a pleasure to see that. I encourage them to come. My role when they come is to bring joy to them, to bring happiness, to enrich their lives, and meet them at where their level is, and it is their quality of life, their dignity, and their care.
That's beautiful. Regina, as a nurse at the nursing home, you have a little bit of a different role, and the Little Sisters of the Poor, they rely on you here in Washington, D.C. because you're on the front lines of care for those at the end of life. You also cared for your husband before his passing. Mm-hmm. What did you learn during your time caring for him?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And what a tremendous privilege and gift it is to accompany someone, my husband in particular, but any of the residents or any of the patients I've had through the years on their journey, their last time, their last hours, their last days here on earth, and to assist them into the next life. It's always a great privilege. What's exceptional about the Little Sisters of the Poor, and I've worked in so many wonderful institutions with great, loving, kind people, but nothing like the Little Sisters of the Poor. It's such a collaborative effort. Everyone from the phenomenal, loving, kind nursing staff, the CNAs, everyone, the housekeeping staff, the kitchen staff, activities like Joyce, but nothing I've ever experienced like the Little Sisters. They come in to the room at the end maybe the last 2 or 3 days of someone's, journey to the next life. They're in there. They are praying the rosary. They are divine mercy. They're singing. It's like choirs of angels. It's phenomenal. And as a nurse, you're in there with best practices. You're assessing the situation, assessing the needs of the resident, of the family that may be there, but nothing. You're in a sacred, it's like hallowed ground. It's like this thin veil between heaven and earth, and the sisters are there. It's unbelievable. It's palpable. It's a sacred arena. And I tell you, there is nothing like that I've ever experienced in, as I said, in all my years. And they're a short time with the little sisters, but it's been the most edifying. And as I said, it's collaborative effort from every level, and just beautiful staff from all around the world, from
So
Africa, from the Philippines, from South America, the Caribbean. Everyone is involved in this, and it's a tremendous privilege.
That's right. And Joyce, tell me a little bit about what it's like caring for strangers really quickly, and how that's transformed your life.
Caring for strangers brought me closer to God, to reach out, to serve, to do what God asked of me to do as a Catholic, to maintain their health. And like I said, their dignity is the most important thing, and respect, to keep them happy to the fullest of the days of their lives.
And you've talked about the throwaway culture before. How do you counter the message of the throwaway culture, Joyce?
Well, I pray over a lot of things that is beyond my call. Some things I can't handle, I just go into prayer, pray the rosary. I speak to a sister about it. So it's a lot of spirituality there that I have to cultivate to keep it moving and to move forward.
That's a beautiful example. Regina, there's a push for euthanasia. As a nurse, for those who are suffering incurable diseases, they're being given this option to end their lives. From your caregiver perspective, what are your thoughts about living out life to its natural end?
Oh yes, it is. Only God gives and takes life, and I have tremendous compassion for those terminally ill patients that, I think that they're really, they're concerned. Perhaps there'll be a burden to a family member, or they're concerned about financial ruin. Or I really don't think the onus is on necessarily their suffering, but suffering is so purposeful, and the redemptive nature of it. And if they were given that insight, I'm telling you, I think that the practitioners, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they mean well, but they really don't understand that only God gives and takes life. And if they could just spend an hour in the hallowed sacred ground where the little sisters during that transition, when they're assisting residents into the next life, I think that would change their world, and they wouldn't even prescribe that as an alternative.
It would change their hearts.
With that amount. It's really not about changing their mind, because they have that conviction that they're doing well. It's changing their hearts. And I think even the most hardened criminal, if you were in that room, even for 15, 30 seconds, you would have a massive conversion. So that would that's what they need. They need a short time with the little sisters.
Well, we all need some time with the little sisters. Thank you both for everything that you do and for this great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for all you do, Montse.
Thank you. The Week in Review is next. A vote on same-sex marriage on Capitol Hill. And with a bleak winter ahead in Ukraine, the head of the Ukrainian Church in America has a special request. And Catholic bells toll again in Iraq. The U.S. Senate clearing a key hurdle to protect same-sex unions tops the Week in Review. All 50 Democrats, as well as 12 Republicans, voted to advance the Respect for Marriage Act, which would make sure same-sex unions and interracial marriages, if the marriage is valid in a state where it is performed, are federally recognized. The Democrat-led bill was delayed until after the midterm elections in hopes it would relieve political pressure on some Republican senators who might be wavering. Lawmakers say the move comes in wake of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's opinion in the Dobbs case, suggesting that the court should reconsider all substantive due process cases, including Obergefell, which effectively nullified the Clinton-era Defense of Marriage Act that defined marriage as a union between a man and a woman.
Well, we already have gay marriage in the country. That's a decision made by the Supreme Court in the Obergefell decision some years ago. This legislation just says that the status which is conveyed by one state has to be recognized by another. At the same time, this legislation provides important religious liberty protections. And it's because of that compromise that I think the bill made sense.
No American should ever be discriminated against because of who they love. And passing this bill would secure much-needed safeguards into federal law.
Opponents of the bill include the Catholic Church, which teaches the definition of marriage is between a man and a woman. Ryan Anderson, president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, says the bill also puts religious liberty at risk.
So the Senate bill, it does contain some window dressing language about the importance of religious liberty and conscience rights, but none of that legislative language is actually sufficient to prevent a hostile government administration from using this law as part of a larger effort to force religious institutions, religious citizens into supporting same-sex marriage. It does not contain anything that explicitly states the IRS may not revoke the nonprofit tax status to an institution that believes the truth about marriage.
The U.S. Catholic bishops urged senators in July to oppose the bill, citing the importance of stable marriages for the well-being of children and society, and expressing concerns about the bill's impact on religious freedom. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon Church, issued a statement in support of protections for the LGBTQ community, also stating that the church's support for marriage between one man and one woman was unchanged. The final vote for the bill is expected soon. There will not be enough votes in Congress to codify Roe v. Wade. President Joe Biden admitted that in comments earlier this week. Before the midterm elections, he had said codifying Roe would be the Democrats' top priority. But with election results in, a split Congress, and a Senate unwilling to sidestep the filibuster, President Biden said those who support abortion legislation on a federal level should not expect any changes. But big changes for those who attend the National March for Life weekend in Washington, D.C. After 25 years, the Archdiocese of Washington has announced it's canceling the annual youth rally and Mass for Life, normally held in conjunction with the march. Thousands of young people attend the rally and Mass, as you can see from this video from 2019. Many say it was a formative pro-life experience that helped shape their lives. The Archdiocese says now that the Supreme Court has overturned Roe, many dioceses are turning their efforts to their individual state marches. In a statement, the Archdiocese says it supports that local work. There will still be regular masses at both the cathedral and basilica in Washington, D.C. Major focus on international affairs this week, with several high-level meetings of importance for the U.S. All eyes were on talks between President Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Though they had met several times when both were vice presidents of their countries, it was their first since Mr. Biden became president nearly 2 years ago. The discussion comes amid increased economic and security tensions between the two superpowers as they compete for global influence. Their meeting focused on many hot-button topics, including the war in Ukraine, military tensions over Taiwan, and human rights. Both sides did agree to resume climate talks. The meeting of the two superpowers happened at the beginning of the G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia. The leaders of the world's largest economies sent a strong message condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The joint declaration said the war has caused massive suffering, jeopardized the global economy still recovering from the pandemic, and caused a food, energy, and financial crisis. A tense moment during the G20 summit when President Biden called emergency talks after a missile landed in Poland on Tuesday, killing 2 people. Poland is a member of NATO, and a Russian attack could have triggered a major escalation. But NATO officials later determined the missile strike was likely an accident, launched by neighboring Ukraine's air defense system. NATO's Secretary General said the strike was not Ukraine's fault, but rather the ultimate responsibility of Russia for starting the war. This week, Russia ramped up its attacks on Ukraine. On Thursday, Russian troops launched up to 18 cruise missiles, all of which were shot down by Ukraine. Other strikes, however, did find their mark. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky posted this video on social media that he says shows a strike on the city of Dnipro Thursday morning. Authorities there say 23 people were injured. On Monday, though, a celebration as President Zelensky joined in singing the national anthem during his surprise visit to the liberated city of Kherson. He hailed the Russian withdrawal from the city as the beginning of the end of the war, as he handed out awards to soldiers for defending their country. The mayor of Kyiv is warning people to prepare for the worst this winter after the city received a dusting of snow this week. Russia has focused on striking Ukraine's energy infrastructure over the last month. Many might not have electricity, water, or heat this winter. Archbishop Boris Gudziak, the Metropolitan of the Ukrainian Church in the U.S., has visited Ukraine since the war broke out in support of his Ukrainian brothers and sisters. He says he and the people of Ukraine are very grateful for donations from Americans. He asks Catholics to unite in prayer during these cold months.
Most people don't realize that millions of windows have been blown out. And the main glass factory of the country has been destroyed, so that basically today, tomorrow, the temperature is dipping down below freezing, and a lot of people are really in misery. They're cold. I just, encourage you, if you want to do a moment of solidarity, get a good coat, put on a hat, and then open the windows in your house and try to pray for the people of Ukraine for 1 hour with the wind and the cold coming into your room. Just imagine people living like that for months.
The Metropolitan of the Ukrainian Catholic Church says the church continues to be with the people of Ukraine, providing the sacraments, prayer, and support. And the sound of hope. For the first time in 8 years, the sound of a church bell rang out in Mosul, Iraq. The church bell was hidden by a Muslim family during the Islamic State's occupation of Mosul from 2014 to 2017. Christians from across Iraq's historic Nineveh plains came to celebrate the event at St. Paul's Chaldean Catholic Cathedral last Sunday. The cathedral reopened in 2019 after suffering damage during the insurgent rule. The Chaldean Archbishop of Mosul told Asinina, Catholic news agency's Arabic language news partner, that the tones of the bell are an invitation to unite hearts and denounce war.
I have never heard the story of the person who gave generously to God and found themselves out of their house or destitute or anything like that. In fact, the opposite are the stories that you do hear, is that God is never outdone in generosity.
Opening your wallet to help your church community. Plus, my sit-down interview with a renowned philanthropist, his philosophy of giving, next.
Churchgoers are often asked to tithe. It literally means giving 10% of your earnings away. But many Catholics don't take it literally. It can be a tough sell, but those who do it religiously say they wouldn't want to live any other way. Alan Holdren has this Catholic Life report.
From the collection basket on Sunday to regular direct deposits, whether to the parish or to favorite charities, Catholics in the pews everywhere are encouraged by the Church to give 10% of their gross monthly income away.
It's not necessarily required. What is required or expected is planned, consistent giving. There is a tradition within the Church, within faith and scriptural history of speaking of tithing when it comes to our faith. And traditionally that was listed as kind of 10%. We read in the Old Testament the tithe of Abraham. That tradition has kind of been upheld, that there be a giving of ourselves, of our gifts, back to God, making a return to the Lord. Good to see you.
Father Conradi himself tithes. He doesn't give it all to the parish. Some goes there, but he also supports other charitable causes and even missionaries.
It comes down to two options of perception, basically. Are we the owners of what we have, or are we the stewards of what we have? And obviously the mentality of the owner is that this is mine to do with as I wish, as I desire. Maybe God gets a little bit over here on the side, as opposed to the mentality of steward, which is I am absolutely given all of the things that I have by God, and ultimately they're not mine.
That was my parish priest, and this is our parish of St. John the Baptist in Beloit, Kansas. It's currently undergoing major restoration, so we've been talking a lot about sacrificial giving here lately. But the discussion of finances and giving plays out in every Catholic parish and family in the world.
We're supposed to put aside something for the community to give back to God.
Dan Salucci is the Philadelphia-based CEO of the Catholic Leadership Institute. CLI has carried out a study of more than 2,100 parishes across the U.S., creating what they call the Disciple Maker Index, and it's come up with surprising conclusions.
Those folks who are going to Mass weekly, about 12% of them would say that they are tithing. So if you project that out, very few people, probably less than 5%, I would say, of actual Catholics in the country are tithing. But I've seen parishes with close to 30 or 40 or 50%.
In a parish that has a higher percentage of people that tithe, what difference does that make?
In the parishes where we see higher levels of tithing, we see larger engagement across the board, not only relative to the activity and engagement in the parish, but really their faith in the church. And so they're the folks who we see almost double in beliefs and practices relative to those who are tithing versus to those who are not.
In Wichita, a concerted effort to tithe has changed the face of the Catholic community here. It's known as the Stewardship model. Father of a family, local parishioner, and co-founder of a Catholic apostolate, Tony Brandt has bought into it.
The Wichita model of stewardship really is a way of life, incorporating stewardship into every aspect of your life. And because we do that, we have the ability and the trust that we can take care of our entire church. We can take care of even our Catholic schools, K through 12. All of our students can have free Catholic education, paid for obviously by our parishes, but that is the key to it, is that you have active stewards who are taking care of the church from within.
Brandt spends much of his time on the road doing parish missions with Casting Nets Ministries, inviting people all over to give until it hurts. But he isn't just encouraging others to tithe, whether with time, talent, or treasure. His family does it too.
I do remember actually having a conversation with one of my daughters about tithing, and that she's, I'm adding it up, I'll get to it eventually. And I was like, no, it's the first check. It's the first fruits. You need to show God that He's the highest priority, not the backwash at the end, right? So we give Him the first drink. Stewardship, that sacrificial giving, not just giving out of our excess, but giving out of our need, is where it enters into the heart. And we know that we're giving as a sacrifice to God. And when we give as a sacrifice to God, our faith explodes.
It's a question every Catholic everywhere must answer for themselves. Am I giving enough? Alan Holdren, EWTN News In Depth.
There are no hard numbers as to how many people actually tithe, but the Catholic Leadership Institute says an overview of people who attend Mass weekly indicates those regular parishioners give about 1.5% of their income to their parish annually. A strong understanding of tithing and deep Christian roots have guided the philanthropy of a well-known Michigan family. Richard DeVos made billions of dollars after co-founding what became the world's largest direct selling company, Amway, in 1959. The DeVos family has donated tens of millions of dollars to education, health, and community services, faith-based organizations, and arts and culture. His son, Doug DeVos, has continued this philanthropy. He and his wife have concentrated donations locally in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area, including academic camps for children, safe havens for domestic violence victims, and Habitat for Humanity. We recently spoke about his family's legacy of giving. Doug, it's great to be here with you at the Napa Institute Principled Entrepreneurship Conference. And obviously you're known as a great entrepreneur, and your family, you come from a legacy of entrepreneurs. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, it's an honor to be a part of this conference and to have a chance to talk to you.
Let's talk about what philanthropy actually can do. Like I mentioned, you come from a line of community builders.
Right.
How did you take that on? How was that passed on to you through your family?
Well, it was a tradition that that my parents had and that they talked about a lot. So very early on in the marriage of my mother and father, before they were successful in any level, there was a decision to tithe, and that was what was going to happen. And they told us that story often about that was their decision, that was an expression of their faith. Whatever wealth or success they had, they were going to do that. And then over the years, they became very blessed to continue to do that at higher and higher levels, and with greater activity and with greater levels of engagement in the community, because they had the capacity and the ability to do that. And so that sort of value, that it's more than tradition, because it was who they were. It was an expression of their belief system, and they engaged us in it, and they were deliberate in wanting to pass that value down and express to us why they gave. It wasn't out of guilt, it wasn't out of some negative sense, it was out of celebration for God's gift to them, and they felt that was their stewardship responsibility to engage in the community. So they began to work a lot in those areas, and that's kind of how that tradition has happened for our family and a lot of us in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area.
You talk about engagement. It's not just cutting checks. There's so much more to it than that.
It can be cutting checks, but I think there's a lot more to it than that, because it's people. And what you're trying to do is walk with somebody. At a certain level, okay, it's a basic need, it's a meal, it's something like that. But beyond that, you're trying to create opportunity for somebody who isn't being served in potentially a traditional way. Somebody who didn't have a mom and dad who helped them, who didn't have access to people or to services to give them an opportunity to move forward. So what you're trying to do is kind of fill a gap that maybe somebody missed, and that's personal. And so you got to try to find the way to do that. Now you do it through charities and you do it through organizations, but you need to have an idea of who you're working with and why you're doing what you're doing, and then try to connect the dots at the end to say, are we doing it?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of philanthropy that can have a negative result. It can create dependency. It can create other sorts of circumstances where people don't, where you're not grabbing hands and helping each other. Yeah. And so you got to be careful. And so that's what we're trying, and it's hard. And so we're spending a lot of time in our work trying to think through that. What are the right results? How do we do this effectively? How do we do it so it really helps somebody? How do we do it in a manner consistent where we believe in them?
Consistent
that they are
with your
special,
values.
unique, valuable people. They're just in a tough spot right now, and we're gonna try to have a relationship where we can move through that to get to a better place. We've kind of made a decision that we're going to do a majority of our work locally, and we're going to invest in more of the local community in a variety of ways, as I said, through business investment as well as philanthropy. And so the further you get away from that, the harder it is to be personally engaged. And so we wanted to be personally engaged, and so to do that, you need to stay a little closer to home.
Pope Francis talks a lot about multi-generational engagement.
Yeah.
And you described that a little bit earlier, talking about your parents, talking
Sure.
about legacy, and that your identity and your faith come from knowing what your parents taught you and what your community taught you. How has multi-generational engagement, not engaging in the throwaway culture of, I'm going to put my parents away somewhere, how has that affected you in your life?
Well, again, it's what my folks taught us, and it's everything. Spending time with our family, with our kids, with my nieces and nephews, with younger people when you can. I may not understand what they're talking about. I mean, I get the phrases or the words that they use. In fact, I often don't.
I'm going to recommend them.
Yeah, but there's a few points of connection with our kids and their friends and those sorts of things. But we have worked very diligently as a family So if you kind of bring it into the family unit context, we have worked very diligently about transitioning those values and talking about, where my parents got their values from their parents and how that was passed down, how they expressed their beliefs, and how we're trying to express our beliefs, and how we hope and we trust they will, see as a great way for them to express, their beliefs, and that they'll share the belief and value system that, and the faith that we have grown up with in our family. But that's not going to happen just out of the blue. It's going to happen because you're going to have diligent conversations. You're going to have specific times where you talk about these things. You're going to write about it. You're going to put it on the table. You're going to debate it in certain instances or certain cases. But at the end, I can't live my kid's life. And so they're going to have to make their decision. But I've got to do the work that I can to at least prepare them and offer a pathway for them so they can make a good decision.
I'm so grateful for the time with you. Thank you so much, Doug.
Good. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
There's an extended version of my interview with Doug DeVos on the EWTN YouTube page. He shares his hopes for the country's future and more on his philanthropic work.
Extending charity to those in need, a commemoration of the World Day of the Poor at the Vatican when we return.
As we close our show, we turn once again to helping those in need. The Church asks us to extend our charity outside the home. This past Sunday, the Vatican celebrated the 6th annual World Day of the Poor, where Pope Francis celebrates Mass and dines with the poor of Rome. We take you to this special Mass and meal in our Images of the Week.
Nel nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo.
Amen. Pope Francis began the day by saying a special Mass in St. Peter's Basilica. The Vatican invited hundreds of refugees, poor and homeless, to participate in the sacrament, signaling that God invites all people to his table. During his homily, Pope Francis called on more fortunate Catholics to break through the inner deafness that prevents us from hearing the stifled cry of pain from the frailest in society. Immediately after the Mass, Pope Francis sat down to eat lunch with the poor. Though the room was packed, children made their way to the Holy Father. They gave him drawings and a hug, a reminder to embrace even the weakest among us.
That's our program for this week. I'm Montse Alvarado. Be sure to join us for our Thanksgiving special next week at this time when we bring you stories of inspiration as we follow several people's faith journeys that have changed their lives. We'll see you here on EWTN.